In the final years of his life, when Padre Poe's body was failing and the stigmata bled more freely and the pain in his side made it difficult to stand for more than a few minutes, he made a confession to his spiritual director that has been recorded in the private archives of the Capuchin Friary at Sanio Rotondo. He said, "The thing that haunts me most after 50 years of seeing souls is not the great sinners. It is not the murderers or the adulterers or the blasphemers. They know what they have done. They arrive before God's judgment with terror. Yes, but also with clarity. They know their crime. What haunts me are the others, the vast, uncountable others, the ones who arrive before God's judgment with a look of genuine confusion on their faces because they do not know what they have done. They went to Mass, they said their prayers, they received the sacraments, they kept the commandments, and they are in purgatory, and they do not understand why. This is not a comfortable thing to hear. If you are a faithful Catholic who goes to Mass and prays and tries to live a good life, the idea that you could arrive at judgment, confused and condemned to purgatory for something you never knew was a sin should terrify you. It should make you sit up straighter in your chair. It should make you lean closer to your screen, because Padre Poe said that this sin that almost no one confesses because almost no one recognizes it as a sin, accounts for more souls in purgatory than every other sin combined. More than theft, more than violence, more than lust, more than lies, more than all of them together. And it is a sin you may be committing right now at this very moment as you listen to this. The sin is called tepidity. In Italian, latidezza, in the language of the church, it is the state of being spiritually lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, neither on fire with love for God, nor frozen in rebellion against Him, simply existing in the vast, gray, comfortable middle where faith is present, but passion is absent, where belief is real, but devotion is routine, where the soul goes through the motions of the spiritual life without ever being moved by them. You know this state. You may not have a word for it, but you know it. It is the Sunday Mass where you sit in the pew and stand. When everyone stands and when everyone kneels and say the responses and receive communion and walk back to your seat, and never once, not for a single second, feel the reality of what just happened. It is the rosary you pray while your mind plans dinner. It is the confession where you list the same 4 sins you listed last month in the same order with the same tone of voice. It is the prayer before bed that you say so quickly. The words blur together like a train announcement you have heard so many times it has become noise. It is faith without fire, devotion without depth, religion without relationship. And Padre Poe said it is the sin that fills purgatory from floor to ceiling with souls who never knew they were sinning. Let me tell you something most people do not realize. I lived in this state for almost 20 years. From the time I married David until the year he was diagnosed with cancer, I was the definition of a lukewarm Catholic. I went to Mass every Sunday at St. Osberg's in Coventry. I sat in the 4th pew from the back left side, same spot every week. I said my prayers every night. I wore a scapular under my blouse, and I felt nothing, not a flicker, not a tremor, not a single moment where the reality of Christ in the Eucharist hit me with anything more powerful than the knowledge that it was almost time to go home and start the roast. 20 years of that. 20 years of standing in the presence of God and feeling less than I felt standing in the queue at Tesco. And I never once in all those years confessed it. I never once walked into a confessional and said, "Father, I am lukewarm," because I did not know it was a sin. I thought it was normal. I thought everyone felt that way. I thought faith was supposed to feel like wallpaper, present, familiar, unremarkable. It was not until David's cancer that the fire started. And even then, it was not devotion that lit it. It was desperation. Snorts, but that is another story. The point is this: if I had died during those 20 years of tidity, I would have been one of the confused souls in purgatory that Padre Poe wept over. And I would not have understood why, because I did everything right. I checked every box. I followed every rule, and none of it would have mattered because God was not looking at my checklist. He was looking at my heart, and my heart was room temperature. In the spring of 1957, a young parish priest named Father Umberto Ferrante traveled from Barletta to San Giovanni Rotondo to see Padre Po. Father Umberto was 31 years old, ordained for 6 years, and he was in trouble. Not moral trouble, not doctrinal trouble, pastoral trouble. He had a parish of 800 souls, and he could not figure out why his church was dying. The numbers were fine. Mass attendance was strong. The pews were full on Sundays. The collection basket was adequate. The parish school had a waiting list. By every measurable standard, St. Ains in Barla was a thriving parish. But Father Umberto could feel something beneath the numbers that the numbers could not capture. A flatness, a dryness, a quality in the air of his church on Sunday mornings that was closer to a dentist's waiting room than to the house of God. People came, people sat, people performed the liturgy with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. And then people left, and in all of it, in the coming and the sitting and the standing and the kneeling and the receiving and the leaving, there was no life, no spark. No moment where Father Umberto could look out from the altar and see a single face that was moved by what was happening on the altar. Not one face in 800. He had tried everything, new homily techniques, parish retreats, prayer groups, a youth program, a women's auxiliary, a men's sodality, more candles, better music, different hymns. Nothing worked. The people came, did what they had always done, and left feeling exactly the way they had always felt, which was nothing. Father Umberto was not a man who gave up easily. He had grown up in a farming family outside Barla, the third of 6 children, and he had the farmer's stubborn patience with things that grow slowly. But this was not growing slowly. This was not growing at all. It was standing still. And he had begun to wonder whether the problem was him, whether he was failing his people in some way he could not identify. Whether there was a deficiency in his priesthood that was poisoning the well of his parish and rendering everything he did spiritually inert. So he went to Padre Po, not for confession, though he made one for counsel. He wanted to sit before a man who could see the spiritual world and ask him, "What am I doing wrong?" He waited in line for 7 hours. When he finally knelt in the confessional, he made his confession first. The usual sins of a young priest, impatience with an elderly parishioner who told the same story every Sunday, pride in a homily that had been well-received distraction during the liturgy of the hours, small things. Padre Po gave him absolution and then said, "That is not why you came." Father Umberto said, "No, Father, I came because my parish is dying and I do not know how to save it." Padre Po was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your parish is not dying. It is asleep, and there is a difference. A dead thing cannot be revived. A sleeping thing only needs to be awakened." Father Umberto felt a flicker of hope. "How do I wake them?" he asked. Padre Po said, "You cannot wake them until you understand what put them to sleep. And what put them to sleep is the same thing that puts most Catholic parishes to sleep, the same thing that fills Purgatory with more souls than any other sin. The sin of tepidity." Hold on, because what Padre Po explained next about tepidity is something I have searched for in catechisms and theology books for years, and I have never found it stated so clearly anywhere else. This is knowledge that came from direct spiritual vision, not from academic study, and it changes the way you understand your own faith. Padre Po said to Father Umberto, "Most people think that purgatory is filled with great sinners who barely repented in time, people who committed terrible acts and squeaked through the gates of mercy by a hair's breadth. This is wrong. The great sinners make up a very small percentage of purgatory, because great sinners, when they repent with fire. Their sorrow is immense because their sin was immense. They come to God burning with contrition. And burning souls, even burning sinful souls, pass through purgatory quickly. The fire of their repentance meets the fire of purification, and the 2 fires consume the dross rapidly. But the lukewarm, Padre Po said, The lukewarm do not burn. They do not burn with sin, and they do not burn with repentance. They arrive at judgment at room temperature. And Snort says room temperature is the hardest thing for purgatory to work with, because there is nothing to ignite, no great sin to purge, no great love to fuel the purging, just a vast, tepid, gray expanse of a life that was lived in the middle. Not bad enough to damn, not alive enough to save quickly. And so they wait. They wait in purgatory while the slow, patient fire of God's purifying love tries to kindle something in a soul that spent 70 or 80 years learning how to feel nothing. Father Umberto said, but tepidity is not a mortal sin. How can it lead to purgatory? Padre Pio said, it is not classified as a mortal sin by the theologians, but I have seen it with my own eyes. And I can tell you this, tepidity is the only sin that gets worse every time you receive the sacraments without being cured of it. Every communion received in a state of tidity deepens the tidity. Every confession made without acknowledging the tidity reinforces it. Every Mass attended without a single moment of genuine presence thickens the walls of the lukewarm prison. Other sins weaken when you go to church. This sin strengthens. Father Umberto felt the blood leave his face because he understood suddenly that every program he had run, every retreat he had organized, every innovation he had introduced had been aimed at the symptoms rather than the disease. He'd been trying to make his parish more active, more engaged, more organized, when what he should have been trying to do was make them more alive. Padre Pio then did something that Father Umberto had not expected. He began to describe specific souls he had seen in purgatory, not in general terms, in specific heartbreaking detail. He said, I will tell you about 3 souls I have seen, 3 Catholics who lived lives that looked exactly like the lives of your parishioners. And all 3 are in purgatory for the sin of tidity, and all 3 are confused. The first, Padre Pio said, was a man named Agustino, a pharmacist 61 years old, when he died from a town not far from here. He went to Mass every Sunday of his adult life, 43 years of Sundays, more than 2,000 Masses. And in all of those Masses, he never once wept at the consecration, not once. He watched the priest raise the host, and he thought about his inventory. He watched the chalice elevated, and he calculated the week's earnings. He received the body of Christ on his tongue and felt less than he felt when he tasted his morning coffee. 2,000 opportunities to encounter the living God in the most intimate way possible. 2,000 times God came to him in the Eucharist, and 2,000 times Augustino's heart was elsewhere, not in sin, not in rebellion, just elsewhere, in the gray, familiar, comfortable elsewhere of a mind that had learned to be present in body and absent in soul. Agustino never confessed this, not Snort's once in 43 years, because no priest ever told him it was a sin, because no homily he ever heard addressed the fact that receiving communion without interior presence is not merely a missed opportunity. It is an offense, not an offense of malice, an offense of indifference. And Snort's indifference to the presence of God is, in the economy of the spiritual world, more grievous than many sins of passion. Because a sin of passion at least acknowledges that God's laws are real and worth breaking. Indifference says, your presence does not matter enough for me to notice. The second soul, Padre Pio told Father Umberto, was a woman, Donna Ida, 73, when she died, a widow who prayed the rosary every single day for 50 years. 18,000 rosaries, 18,000. And in all of those rosaries, she never once paused at the words, thy will be done, and asked herself whether she meant them. She said the words, she said them perfectly. The pronunciation was flawless. The sequence was correct. But the words passed through her lips the way water passes through a pipe, without touching the sides, without being absorbed, without changing anything. Donna Ida's rosary was a performance, a beautiful, disciplined, admirable performance, but it was not prayer. It was the shell of prayer with the prayer removed. And every day she prayed it, the shell grew harder and more polished and more impenetrable. And the space inside where God was supposed to live grew emptier and more hollow until by the end of her life, Donna Ida's rosary was a perfectly crafted vessel with absolutely nothing inside it. And she never confessed this because she did not know. She thought counting the beads was the same as touching God. She thought saying the words was the same as meaning the words. And no one in 50 years ever told her the difference. I need to stop here for a moment because I recognize Donna. I was Donna. For years, my rosary was exactly what Padre Poe described, a shell, a beautiful, disciplined, empty shell. I could pray 5 decades in 11 minutes flat. I knew because I timed myself once, not out of devotion, but out of the same impulse that makes you time your commute to see if you can beat your record. That is what my rosary had become, a commute, a daily trip from the first Hail Mary to the last Glory, be traveled with the same mechanical efficiency and the same spiritual absence as the drive from my house in Coventry to the Tesco on Warwick Road. I could do it with my eyes closed, and that was the problem. My eyes were closed, my heart was closed. The only thing open was my mouth, and mouths alone do not pray. The third soul Padre Poe described to Father Umberto was the one that disturbed the young priest the most because it was not an old person who had spent decades in Tidity. It was a young man, perhaps 22, Padre Poe said, an altar boy. He had served at the altar since he was 12 years old. 10 years of standing closer to the Eucharist than anyone else in the church except the priest. 10 years of holding the crutes, ringing the bells at the consecration, carrying the candles in procession, kneeling at the foot of the altar, while the body and blood of Christ were made present 3 feet from his face. And in 10 years, he never once felt the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Not once he felt the weight of the quits. He felt the heat of the candles. He felt the cold of the marble floor through the knees of his cassock. He felt everything except the one thing that the entire Mass existed to make present. Christ, the living Christ, standing 3 feet away. And this young man's soul was so tepid, so accustomed to proximity without presence, that snorts the most powerful encounter available to a human being. The encounter with God in the flesh produced in him less sensation than a breeze through an open window. Padre Poe said this young man died in an accident, a fall from a scaffolding at a construction site. He was 22, and when he arrived before God, he did not understand why he was being sent to purgatory. He said, "But I served at the altar. I was there every Sunday. I was closer to you than anyone." And God said, "You were close to my body, but you were far from my heart. You stood in my presence the way a guard stands at a door, present in position, absent in devotion. And the distance between your body and your soul during all those years at my altar is the distance you must now cross in purgatory." Father Umberto was shaking. He said, "Father, how many of my parishioners are in this state?" Padre Peo said, "I cannot tell you the number, but I can tell you this. If you walked into your church on any given Sunday and could see what I see, the spiritual state of every soul in every pew, you would weep, because the majority of them are tepid, not all. There are always a few souls in every parish who burn, a few whose prayers rise like incense, a few whose presence at Mass is a genuine encounter with the living God. But the majority, Father, the vast, comfortable majority, are at room temperature, and they do not know it, and no one tells them, and they go home and come back next Sunday. And the temperature stays the same, and the years pass, and the tidity hardens, and eventually they die, and then they know, hold on, because there is a document that confirms everything Padre Poe said about tidity, and it is not a private revelation. It is not a legend. It is in the book of Revelation itself, and it is the most terrifying sentence Christ ever spoke. In the 3rd chapter of the book of Revelation, verse 16, Christ says to the church in Laodicea, "So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." That is Christ speaking, not a saint, not a theologian, not a spiritual director, Christ himself. And he does not say, I will gently correct you. He does not say, I will be disappointed. He says, I will spit you out of my mouth. The Greek word is emo. It means to vomit. Christ says that lukewarmness makes him physically sick, that tepidity is so offensive to God that the metaphor he reaches for is not punishment or correction, but revulsion. The same God who ate with tax collectors and embraced lepers and forgave the woman caught in adultery says that lukewarm believers make him want to vomit. If that does not wake you up, nothing will. And Padre Pio knew this verse. He referenced it often in a letter to his spiritual director, Padre Agustino Daniel, dated the 7th of April, 1915. Padre Pio wrote, I see the souls of the tepid, and they terrify me more than the souls of the wicked, because the wicked have fire in them, even if it is the wrong fire. The tepid have no fire at all. They are empty hearths in winter. And God, who is fire himself, cannot dwell in a cold hearth. He stands outside and knocks and waits and calls, and the tepid hear the knocking and think it is the wind. This letter has been preserved. It has been authenticated. It is part of the official correspondence of Padre Pio that the Vatican examined during the canonization process. It is not hearsay. It is not legend. It is Padre Pio in his own handwriting, in his own words, confirming that he saw tepidity as the most dangerous spiritual state a Catholic can inhabit. More dangerous than active sin, because active sin has an antidote. It is called confession. But tepidity has no antidote in the standard sacramental toolkit, because the tepid person does not know they are sick. They go to confession and confess impatience and gossip and missing morning prayers. They never confess the thing that is actually killing them. I am lukewarm. I do not feel God's presence. My faith has no fire. These words are never spoken in the confessional because the tepid person does not recognize them as a confession. They recognize them, if they recognize them at all, as a feeling, a mood, a phase, something that will pass, something that everyone goes through, not a sin, never a sin. And this is where the hidden proof becomes devastating, because Padre Pio did not merely observe tepidity. He tracked it. He told Father Alberto that he had noticed a pattern among the tepid souls he had encountered over 50 years. The pattern was this. Tepidity is progressive. It does not stay at the same temperature. It cools slowly, imperceptibly, but relentlessly. A soul that is lukewarm at 30 is cooler at 40, cooler still at 50. By 60, it is approaching a spiritual coldness that is almost indistinguishable from the coldness of unbelief. Not because the person has stopped believing, but because their belief has been drained of every last calorie of warmth. Padre Pio described 4 stages of tepidity that he had observed. He called them the 4 degrees of cooling. At 4 grad Delrid, the first degree is distraction. This is where it begins. The soul is present at Mass, but the mind is elsewhere. The rosary is prayed, but the heart is not engaged. Prayer becomes a task to be completed rather than an encounter to be experienced. Most Catholics enter this stage at some point in their lives. It is normal. It is not yet dangerous. But if it is not addressed, it deepens. The second degree is routine. The distraction becomes habitual. The soul no longer even tries to be present during prayer. It has accepted that prayer is a mechanical activity like brushing teeth, something done because it should be done, not because it produces anything. The person still goes to Mass, still prays, still receives the sacraments. But the interior life has become as flat and featureless as a parking lot. There is no landscape, no hills, no valleys, no beauty, just asphalt, just the same gray surface stretching in every direction. The third degree is indifference. The clears throat routine has calcified into a kind of spiritual numbness. The person no longer notices that they are numb. They no longer miss the fire because they have forgotten what fire feels like. They hear the words of the gospel and they do not stir. They receive communion and they do not tremble. They see a crucifix and they do not weep. Not because they are hard-hearted, because they have become spiritually anesthetized, sighs and gasps. The sacraments are still being administered, but they are being administered to a patient who cannot feel them. The medicine is being poured into a vessel that has no bottom. The fourth degree, Padre Poe said, and his voice dropped to a whisper when he said it, is comfort. This is the final and most lethal stage. The person has become so thoroughly tepid that they are comfortable in their tepidity. They have built a life around it. They have friends who are tepid. They attend a parish that is tepid. They read spiritual books that are tepid. Everything in their world confirms that their temperature is normal and they are content. This is the stage that Padre Poe said was almost impossible to reverse without a crisis, because the soul has sealed itself inside a comfortable room with no windows. It cannot see the fire outside. It cannot feel the heat. It cannot smell the smoke. It is perfectly insulated, and it is dying. Father Umberto sat in the confessional at San Giovanni Rotondo and wept because he recognized all four stages in his parish. He recognized them in his parishioners. He recognized them in the flat, gray, featureless quality of Sunday morning at St. Anthony's. And worst of all, he recognized them in himself. Father, he said, I am tepid too. I have been tepid for years. How do I cure myself? How do I cure my parish? Padre Poe said something that Father Umberto did not expect. He said, you cannot cure tidity with activity. You have already tried that. More programs, more retreats, more committees, more events. Activity is what the tepid do to convince themselves they are not tepid. They stay busy, they organize, they volunteer, they fill their calendars with parish functions and Bible studies and fundraisers. And all of it, every bit of it is performed at room temperature. You cannot warm a cold room by rearranging the furniture. You need fire. Where does the fire come from? Father Umberto asked. Padre Poe said, it comes from only one place. It comes from the truth about your own temperature, the truth that most Catholics will spend their entire lives avoiding, the truth that you are not as alive as you think you are, that your faith is not as real as you assume it is, that your prayer is not as powerful as you believe it to be. The fire of the spiritual life does not come from feelings or from programs or from emotional experiences at retreats. It comes from the honest acknowledgement that you are cold, because only a person who admits they are cold will seek warmth, and only a person who seeks warmth will find God, because God is warmth. God is fire, and fire does not force itself into a room that believes it is already warm enough. This is what truly matters, and I want you to hear it clearly. The cure for tepidity is not more devotion. It is not praying harder or longer or louder. The cure for tepidity is honesty, the brutal, uncomfortable, humiliating honesty of standing before God and saying, I am lukewarm. My faith is tepid. My prayers are mechanical. My communions are routine. My spiritual life is a performance. And I have been performing for years. And the performance has become so polished that I convinced myself it was real. But it is not real. And I know it, and you know it. And I am finally saying it out loud. Padre Poe told Father Umberto that the cure for tepidity has 4 parts, not 5, not 7, 4. And they must be done in order, because each one builds on the one before it. You now understand what Padre Poe saw when he looked at the spiritual world. The vast population of Purgatory filled not with great sinners, but with lukewarm believers. The 4 stages of cooling, the pattern of progressive tidity that turns a living faith into a cold, hollow, comfortable shell. This channel exists to expose the truths that most Catholics never hear, the truths that priests are afraid to preach and spiritual directors are too polite to address. The super thanks button below this video is not a tip. It is a declaration that you want these truths to keep reaching the souls who are freezing to death in their own comfort. The soul in the parish down the street who has not felt God in 20 years. The soul who prays every day and hears nothing back. The soul who is you or was you or will be you if you do not hear what comes next. The first part of the cure is the confession of tidity, not a general confession, a specific one. Clear to your priest, Kneel in the confessional and say the words that the tepid never say. Father, I confess the sin of spiritual lukewarmness. I have received the sacraments without interior devotion. I have prayed without presence. I have attended Mass without encountering Christ. I have lived my faith at room temperature, and I have never acknowledged this as a sin until now. Say it out loud. In the confessional, Padre Poe said that the act of confessing tidity is itself the first spark, because to confess it, you must admit it, and to admit it, you must feel it. And to feel it, even for a moment, is to crack the shell. One crack is enough. God can work with one crack. He cannot work with a perfect, polished, unbroken shell. But give him a crack, and he will pour fire through it. The second part of the cure is the single encounter. Padre Poe told Father Umberto to teach his parishioners to stop trying to pray for an hour and start trying to pray for 10 seconds. One real moment, one genuine encounter, not a decade of the rosary, not a novena, not a chaplet, one moment during Mass, one moment during prayer, one moment during the day where the soul stops everything and says, God, you are here. I know you are here. And for these 10 seconds, I am here to fully, completely, with nothing between us. Padre Poe said that 10 seconds of genuine presence with God is worth more than 10 years of mechanical devotion, because those 10 seconds are real, and real is what ignites. He said, I do not ask my penitents to pray for hours. I snorts ask them to pray for one real moment, and then another, until the moments begin to connect, until the gaps between the real moments begin to shrink, until one day the person is praying an entire rosary in genuine presence, and they do not know how they got there. They got there 10 seconds at a time. The third part of the cure is the weekly fire check. Once a week, sit before a crucifix and ask yourself honestly, where is my temperature? Am I warmer than last week? Cooler, the same? Do not judge yourself. Do not punish yourself. Simply measure. Padre Peo said, a person who measures their temperature every week will never drop below the 2nd degree without noticing. It is when you stop measuring that the cooling accelerates, because you stop measuring when you stop caring, and snorts, you stop caring when you have reached the 3rd degree. So measure while you still care, while the question still bothers you, because the day it stops bothering you is the day you have entered the 4th degree, and the 4th degree, as I have told you, is almost impossible to leave without a crisis. Sighs and gasps. The 4th part of the cure is the prayer of fire. Padre Peo gave Father Umberto a specific prayer to teach his parishioners. It was not a long prayer. It was not a complicated prayer. It was 7 words. Lord, set my cold heart on fire. That is the prayer, 7 words. And Padre Peo said to pray it at one specific moment, not in the morning, not at night. At the moment of consecration during Mass, the exact moment when the priest raises the host and the bread becomes the body of Christ. At that moment when heaven touches earth and the living God becomes present on the altar. Say those 7 words in your heart. Lord, set my cold heart on fire, because that is the moment of maximum proximity to divine fire. That is the moment when the furnace door is open. And if you direct your 7 words at the open furnace, Padre Peo said, eventually you will catch. Not the first time, perhaps not the 10th time, but eventually, because fire is persistent, and a soul that keeps putting itself near the furnace will sooner or later ignite. Father Umberto went back to Bleda and did exactly what Padre Peo told him. He preached a homily on tepidity, not a gentle clears throat homily, not a comforting homily, a homily that used the word vomit, because Christ used the word vomit. And Father Umberto was done being polite about a sin that was killing his parish. He told his 800 parishioners that he had been to Padre Peo, and that Padre Peo had told him that most of them were lukewarm. He told them about the 3 souls in purgatory. He told them about the 4 stages of cooling. He told them about the the confession of Tidity and the single encounter and the weekly fire check and the prayer of fire. The reaction was extraordinary, not immediately. The Sunday of the homily, people were stunned. Some were angry. A woman named Sonora Baldini told Father Umberto after Mass that he had been rude and presumptuous and that her faith was perfectly fine. Thank you very much. And Father Umberto, who would normally have apologized and retreated, said, "Senor Baldini, when was the last time you felt the presence of Christ at Mass?" And Senora Baldini opened her mouth to answer and then closed it because she could not remember. She could not remember ever feeling the presence of Christ at Mass. And the fact that she could not remember, and the fact that she had never noticed that she could not remember, said everything that Padre Brepo's homily had tried to say. Within a month, something began to change at St. Annie's in Barla. People started coming to confession and saying, for the first time in their lives, "Father, I confess the sin of spiritual lukewarmness." The first time Father Umberto heard it, he wept behind the screen because those 7 words, "I confess the sin of spiritual lukewarmness," with the crack in the shell. And through that crack, grace began to pour. Within 3 months, the parish was unrecognizable. Not because the numbers had changed. The numbers were the same. 800 souls, same pews, same collection basket, same school. But the temperature had changed. Father Umberto could feel it the moment he walked into the church on Sunday morning. The air was different. The faces were different. There were people weeping during the consecration. There were people lingering after Mass, not to chat about football, but to sit in the pew in silence with their eyes closed and their hands folded, savoring the presence they had just received. There were people praying the rosary in the side chapel with an intensity that Father Umberto had never seen before. Slowly, word by word, as if each word were a precious stone they were placing in the hand of God. And at the consecration, Father Umberto could see lips moving in the congregation, not the words of the liturgy. 7 different words. "Lord, set my cold heart on fire." I've been saying those 7 words at every Mass for the past several years now. Every consecration, every time the priest raises the host and the bread becomes "God, Lord, set my cold heart on fire." And I can tell you that Padre Po was right. It did not work the first time or the 5th or the 10th, but somewhere around the 20th or 30th time, something shifted. I felt the consecration, not understood it, not believed it, felt it. The way you feel heat from a fire when you hold your hands near it, a warmth that started in my chest and spread outward. And I started to cry in the middle of Mass in the 4th pew from the back left side. Same spot I had sat in for 20 years, feeling nothing. I started to cry because God had finally set my cold heart on fire. And the fire was so beautiful and so terrible and so real that I understood for the first time what I had been missing for 2 decades, and what the souls in purgatory, the confused souls, the lukewarm souls, the room temperature souls had been missing for their entire lives. Padre Po said at the end of his conversation with Father Umberto something that I want to be the last thing you hear today. He said, "The Snorch devil does not need you to sin. He only needs you to be comfortable." A comfortable Catholic is a Catholic who has stopped seeking God. And a Catholic who has stopped seeking God is already in the 1st degree of cooling. And the cooling, once it begins, does not stop on its own. It only stops when someone names it. When someone says the word out loud, lukewarm, tepid, cold, name it, because unnamed things grow in the dark. Named things are exposed to the light, and light is warm. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Not a command, not a practice, not a prayer, just a question. And I want you to answer it honestly, because Padre Po said that the honest answer to this question is the single most important piece of information about your spiritual life. When was the last time your faith felt like fire? Not warmth, not comfort, not the pleasant feeling of a Sunday morning routine. Fire. The kind of fire that makes you weep at the consecration. the kind of fire that makes your hands shake when you hold the rosary, the kind of fire that makes you kneel beside your bed at night and speak to God not because you are supposed to, but because you cannot help it. Because he is real, and he is present, and he is fire, and you can feel it. If you can remember, thank God and ask for more. If you cannot remember, you now know what that means, and you now know what to do. Go to confession. Confess the titity, crack the shell, and then at the next Mass you attend, at the moment of consecration when the priest raises the host and heaven opens. Say the 7 words, Lord. Set my cold heart on fire, and mean them for 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds of truth. That is all God needs. 10 seconds of genuine presence. 10 seconds of honest seeking. 10 seconds of a soul that has finally stopped performing and started burning. What degree are you? First, second, third, or fourth? Write it in the comments. Not to shame yourself, to name it, because Padre Pio said that naming your temperature is the first step to changing it. And if you write fire, if your faith is already burning, then pray the 7 words for the person scrolling past this video right now who is in the 4th degree and does not know it. Because your prayer, your real burning alive prayer, might be the spark that wakes them. I ask you again, not as a test, not as a judgment, but as an invitation. What degree are you? If you are 1st degree distracted, but still aware of the distraction, then thank God that you can still see the problem and take the next step. Confess it. Ask for help. Do not let that distraction become routine. If you are secondary routine, mechanical, going through the motions without even trying to be present, then stop. Stop and say, this is not enough. Stop and ask yourself, do I want to feel God, or have I given up on that possibility? Because if you have given up, then you are already sliding into the 3rd degree. And if you are 3rd degree, indifferent, numb, unable to weep at the crucifix or tremble at the host, then I beg you, do not wait for a crisis. Do not wait for cancer or tragedy or a near-death experience to wake you. Go to a priest today, this week, and confess the sin of spiritual lukewarmness. Even if you feel nothing, even if the words sound hollow in your own ears, speak them anyway. The act of speaking them is an act of defiance against the numbness. And God honors defiance. He honors the soul that says, I do not feel you, but I will still seek you. I do not burn, but I will still ask for fire. And if you are 4th degree comfortable content, insulated, surrounded by tepid friends and tepid books and tepid liturgies, and you see no problem, then I am speaking to you now from beyond your comfortable walls. I am telling you that your comfort is a lie. Your peace is a deception. Your contentment is the calm before the judgment. And the judgment will not be gentle. It will not be kind. It will be the shock of a soul that spent a lifetime at room temperature suddenly plunged into the fire of divine love, a fire that purifies, but also a fire that burns. Do not wait until that moment to discover that your faith was a shell. Do not wait until you stand before God with that look of confusion that Padre Pio wept over. Wake up now. Wake up while there is still time, while the sacraments are still available, while the confessional is still open, while the priest still raises the host at every Mass and says, "Behold the Lamb of God." Look at that host. Look at it, not with your eyes, but with your soul. Ask yourself, is this the living God, or is this just bread? And if your answer is not a resounding, tearful trembling, "This is my Lord," then you know what you must do. Say the 7 words. Say snorts them now. Not only at the consecration, but right now in your heart, Lord, set my cold heart on fire. Say it once. Say it again. Say it 100 times until the words are not words, but a cry. And if you mean them, even for 1 second, even for 10 seconds, God will hear you. He has been waiting to hear you say them your whole life. He has been standing outside the door of your lukewarm heart knocking. And he is still knocking. Clear his throat. Open the door. Let him in. Let the fire begin. Amen.